For decades, Nigeria has borrowed to fuel its development, to build roads, schools, and hospitals, to modernize its infrastructure. But this relentless borrowing has come at a steep price, a staggering debt that now looms over the nation, consuming its resources and straining its economy. But how did Nigeria get to this point? Who were the leaders who first took the bold step of borrowing from international community? And how is Nigerian current president Bola Tinubu grappling with the ever-growing weight of a national debt that threatens the very fabric of the nation? In this documentary, we will journey back in time to explore Nigeria's first step into the world of international borrowing, uncover the economic decisions that set the stage for today's crisis, and examine how the country is struggling to balance its ambitions with the reality of an unstable debt burden. We will also explore how corruption at every level of government has not only mismanaged these funds, but also caused billions to vanish into private hands, leaving behind incomplete projects, failing infrastructure, and unfulfilled promises today. In 1960, Nigeria achieved independence from British colonial rule, ushering in an era of hope and self-determination. The country's new leaders were faced with the task of building a nation from the ground up, creating infrastructure, schools, and industries to support a growing population. Despite its rich resources, Nigerian government quickly realized that funding its ambitious development plans would require foreign capital. At the time, Nigeria had minimal experience in international finance, so it turned to the global financial community, including the World Bank and bilateral lenders, to secure loans that would help meet its economic goals. These early loans helped kickstart key developmental projects like roads, railways, and healthcare facilities. But as the borrowing increased, successive governments failed to use the funds wisely. Instead of investing in long-term or sustainable growth, these loans were often diverted into questionable ventures or vanished entirely into private accounts. Roads were built, but they eroded within months due to shabby materials. Hospitals were constructed, but they remained empty due to lack of trained personnel and medical supplies. In the end, much of the borrowed money simply disappeared, never to be seen again. The first Nigerian president to introduce borrowing on a national scale was Nnamdi Azikiwe, the ceremonial head of state in Nigeria's early years of independence. While Azikiwe himself had limited executive power, it was during the administration of Prime Minister Tafawa Balewa that the country's first international loans were negotiated. The country faced a growing need to modernize its infrastructure, build education systems, and create an industrial base that could withstand the pressure of a rapidly developing nation. To achieve this, Nigeria entered into its first loans with the International Monetary Fund (IMF) and the World Bank. These loans were initially seen as an essential tool for development. However, the drive for progress soon collided with the lure of corruption. Political elites misdirected funds, awarded contracts to political allies who failed to deliver, and set up ghost projects that existed only on paper. This was the beginning of a tragic pattern. Loans meant to improve Nigerians' future were squandered, mismanaged, or stolen outright. The funds that could have built a lasting foundation were instead wasted, deepening the country's dependency on borrowing. The 1970s brought a sudden change for Nigeria. With the discovery of vast oil reserves in Niger Delta, Nigerians' economic prospects soared. Oil became the country's main export, and the government suddenly had access to vast wealth. The oil boom brought a flood of revenue into the country, but it also created new challenges. But instead of using the oil wealth to fund long-term projects, Nigeria's leaders were quick to borrow heavily. Under General Yakubu Gowon, military leaders took advantage of the booming oil economy, borrowing extensively from international banks and government. However, much of the borrowed funds were misused. Large infrastructure projects were launched, but corruption flourished in the form of overinflated contracts, underperforming projects, and kickbacks. In many cases, money was siphoned off before the projects even began. Instead of transforming the country into a self-sustaining economy, the borrowed money funded white elephant projects that didn't meet the need of the population. the promise of new roads, hospitals and schools were replaced by poorly executed projects that neither contributed to the economy nor improved the living conditions. What could have been transformative infrastructure was rendered ineffective and incomplete. The 1980s marked the beginning of Nigeria's first major debt crisis. The global economic downturn, combined with a sharp drop in oil prices, exposed Nigerians to over-reliance on oil exports and foreign borrowing. As the price of oil dropped, Nigerians' revenue shrank, but its debt obligations remained, leading to a crushing debt burden. Under President Muhammadu Buhari, the country faced a tough austerity measures, but corruption remained rampant. Under General Ibrahim Babangida, Nigeria entered into loan agreement with IMF and World Bank, resulting in structural adjustment programs (ASPs) that imposed harsh economic reforms. While these loans were intended to stabilize the economy, once again, Nigeria's leaders failed to use the funds effectively. Funds that should have gone to improving education, healthcare, and essential infrastructure were misused. Babangida's government was notorious for granting large loans to the military and government officials, who in turn misappropriated much of the money. In many cases, foreign aid and loans were used to fund lavish lifestyles of a corrupt elite, while basic public services deteriorated. The result was a generation of Nigerians who were deprived of essential services, while the borrowed funds were wasted, often disappearing into unaccountable projects or foreign bank accounts. By the early 2000s, Nigerians' debt had ballooned to over $30 billion, and the country was on the verge of economic collapse. However, in 2005, the Nigerian government secured a historical debt relief deal through negotiations with the Paris Club, a group of international creditors. Nigeria's debt was reduced by over $18 billion, and the country was given the chance to restructure its remaining obligations. This debt relief was seen as a major achievement for the Nigerian government. Yet, despite this temporary reprieve, the mismanagement of funds continued. Nigerians' leaders failed to follow through with the necessary reforms, diverting resources that could have been used for long-term growth into private pockets. Public work projects were announced but never completed. New industries were supposed to be built, but they never materialized. Even with billions in debt relief, the structural issue that allowed corruption to flourish remained. Nigeria finds itself once again in the midst of a growing debt crisis. When President Bola Tinubu assumed office in May 2023, the country was already grappling with a national debt that had exceeded $100 billion. Under Tinubu's leadership, Nigeria has been forced to borrow further to finance its budget and infrastructure projects. However, the pattern remains. Successive Nigerian governments have failed to use borrowed funds in a way that supports sustainable development. While some investments have been made in infrastructure, much of the funds is still misallocated. Public funds are siphoned off through corruption, ineffective governance, and a lack of transparency. Instead of investing in long-term economic reforms that would lead to self-sustainable growth, Nigerian leaders continue to rely on short-term fix, borrowing more money without addressing the underlying issues of corruption and poor financial management. The result is a mounting debt burden, with almost 50% of the national income in 2024 going towards servicing debt. While essential services like healthcare, education, and security received insufficient funding, the borrowing continues. But so does the failure to properly utilize these funds to achieve real development. And while the worry continues to grow on the debt profile of Nigeria, on the 19th of November 2024, President Bola Tinubu wrote to the National Assembly to seek the approval of a fresh $2.2 billion as a new external borrowing plan in the 2024 Appropriation Act. As of November 11, 2024, Nigeria's debt is around 134 trillion naira, which is a 13 trillion naira increase from March 2024. And with these additional borrowing requests of the current president, that leaves Nigeria at a crossroad if the country will be able to service its debt in the next 20 or 10 years. Today, Nigeria is at a critical crossroad. Will it continue down the path of relentless borrowing, or will it finally find a way to break free from this circle? Can the country strike a balance between its aspirations for development and the harsh reality of fiscal responsibility? The future of this great nation hinges on its ability to manage not just its debts but its resources, its leadership, and its vision for tomorrow. The journey is far from over if Nigeria can navigate these turbulent waters with a commitment to ending corruption and using borrowed funds for the intended purpose. It holds the potential to unlock a future that matches its vast promise. The road ahead is uncertain and the challenges are immense, but so too are the opportunities. What story would Nigeria write next? Only time will tell.